first time I was introduced on the stage in New York, they introduced me as the man who'd made $100 million in real estate in Australia. And I was kind of humbled by that, but I felt in the interest of integrity I had to set the record straight. I said, listen, when you're in New York, you may think that the Sydney Harbour Bridge connects Australia to New Zealand, but it doesn't. It wasn't Australia, it was in New Zealand. And secondly, to be perfectly honest, it wasn't even in the real estate industry, it was in the oil industry when oil and gas was big there. And I said, thirdly, to be perfectly honest, it wasn't 100 million, it was only 10 million. And beside that, it wasn't me, it was my brother. And he didn't make 10 million, he lost 10 million. But apart from that, you've got the right person. So things are never what they seem. They aren't. And I've got something here just to prove that point. And this is sort of one of my favorite things to show. Well, you see, if you want to learn something tonight, though, you have to go beyond your comfort zone. Have you heard that before? Do you know that? So I'm here to teach you something about real estate. And I'm willing to sacrifice myself in order that you do learn. I'm not here to make you like me. I'm here to have you walk out tonight and say, wow, I've learned something new. Is that cool? So I do want to thank Stuart for putting on this awesome event. I mean, you know, look at the support they give you here and getting everyone together. So thank you for all you've done, the entire team. They've been nothing but gracious and very professional. But I also want to thank him for being accurate in his introduction. And you might think, oh yeah, that's easy to say, the world's highest paid sports person. Well, we were in my office in America, and this guy called, and the girls went weak in the knees. They said, oh my gosh, it's A-Rod calling for Dolf. And I said, who's A-Rod? And which guy would call himself a rod unless he had an inferiority complex about something? I did. And they said, take the call, take the call. So this dude in a laconic voice said, hey, how'd you like to come to my game this weekend in Houston? And I thought, well, he's a sports player, you know, big deal. I'm not into sport, and when you come from a world where we play cricket and rugby, and you see the guys there put on shoulder pads and helmets, and they call that football, you think this is for sissies, you know. So I said, well, I can't, Houston, because I've got an event on in Seattle this weekend. He said, well, how about next weekend in New York? I said, I'm in San Diego. Well, he kept calling me, and one day he called and he said, and I've got to add here that from his accent, I thought he was an African American. I thought he was black. And so I thought, he's black and he's a sports player, he's a basketball player, right? My naivety. So I got it in my mind that he was a basketball player. And you know that when you have a theory, you'll always find evidence to support that theory, right? With anything. So I got it in my head that that's what he was. He calls one day and he says, I see you're doing a weekend event in Dallas. I said, yes, at the Intercontinental. He said, well, can I see you on the Monday after that? Because I live in Dallas. And I felt like saying, well, that's nice. I live in Phoenix. But I said, no, I can't see you on the Monday morning. I've got a TV interview. And he said, well, my bodyguard can pick you up after the interview. And I thought, bodyguard? I thought, I can play this game of one-upmanship. I said, well, I'll have my assistant with me. And he said, my secretary will pick her up. And I thought, why can't you come with me? So I sort of forgot about it. I did the event. I did the TV interview Monday morning. I walk out. There's Boris, the bodyguard. Come with me, sort of thing. So we drove to this palatial mansion overlooking Lake Dallas. There were guys with chef hats running around and all that. And I'm sitting on the couch next to Boris, and suddenly he elbows me and says, that's him. I said, pardon? He said, that's him. I said, that's who? He said, that's A-Rod. I said, no, A-Rod's black. And he heard me. I said, you're A-Rod? He said, yeah, pleased to meet you. I said, yeah, I'm pleased to meet you. I said, the next thing you're going to tell me is you're not a basketball player. He said, no, I'm a baseball player. I said, well, pleased to meet you. And I got it completely wrong. And not only friends, but strangers cringe about this, because he ended up writing the foreword to this book, Real Estate Riches, including the bit where it says, despite the fact that he thought I was a basketball player and not a baseball player. You don't know him, maybe. Does anyone know who he is? A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez? He's Alex Rodriguez. He's on a $253 million contract. He's the highest paid sports person on this planet. And he sought me out because most sports people, and this is very interesting, they earn a lot of money, millions of dollars, some of them, and then they retire at 30, 31, 32, somewhere around there, either through old age or injury. And then within 3 years, they're broke, usually because of fast food, fast cars, and fast women, right, in reverse order. And then they call me and they say, I really need you to help me. Not even I'd like you to or I want you to, but I need you to help me. I said, well, what have we got to work with? He says, well, I'm broke, but I like being rich, so make me rich again. I said, okay, and you can't play sport anymore? How am I supposed to do that with nothing? But he's done it differently. He owns a lot of real estate. He's made more money through real estate than by being the highest paid sports person. And he credits me with that. So it's a big accolade. So it's all as Stuart said. I mean, he sought me out. And I know a lot of you are having a lot of trouble focusing on what I'm saying because you still can't get over this. So let's deal with this right now. May I have a show of hands, please? How many have read this and agree with it and are willing to admit that they agree to it? 3 people. Okay. Well, I'm just curious who came here on their own tonight. So may I have a show of hands? How many disagree with it? All right, now, folks, not even a third of you have voted on this. You haven't. And here's the first lesson for you to learn. If you can't make a decision on something as inane as this, how are you ever going to buy a commercial property? I know exactly what will happen. The agent will come up to you and say, well, here it is. It's got a 28% return. It's got a 59-year lease still to run on it. Do you want to buy it? Put your hand up if you do. No, this is what he'll say. Put your hand up if you don't. And he'll say, well, if you're not sure, do you need more information? If you can't decide on something like this, do you know the answer in your head so you just don't want to share it? You don't want to tell that cute chick you met on the way in that you actually agree with it? Or what is it? So how many have read it and agree with it? Right. Oh, quite a few of you. That's weird, you guys. You guys are weird. And how many disagree with it? Now we've got some engagement. Give yourselves a round of applause. Okay. Well, I want to do something here to just change it up a bit. I'm going to put a colon after the word woman, and I'm going to put a comma after the word her. Now notice how the laughter comes in waves. No, it does. This group got it quite early on. This one took a bit of time. Some of you, I can tell from years of experience, some of you are looking at it and say, what's so funny? If you don't understand it, ask someone in the break, okay? I'm kidding, because there's not a break. But anyway, if you get it, we've completely changed the meaning of the sentence. Would you agree? Oh, by the way, may I have a show of hands now, especially some of those women who didn't like me much recently? How many of you agree with it now? All right. And how many of you disagree with it? Okay, thank you. And here's the point, folks. My point is that by putting 3 silly little marks on the screen or sheet of paper or whatever, do you agree that we've completely changed the meaning of that sentence? My aim tonight is to put 3 little marks figuratively on your mind, your perception, your understanding of commercial real estate, so that I might completely change the way you see it. Because unless you're already investing regularly in commercial real estate, you don't really understand what it's all about sufficiently well to do it. And I'm here to convince you that it's a good thing to do, and that's why I do it. Even though I've written 15 books, some of them are here, most of them are on residential real estate. Not because that's my passion, that's because if I'm going to help a large body of people, that's where I need to start helping them. But my personal passion is doing commercial, for reasons that we'll go over tonight. Are we all good so far on that? Okay. So, there are many angles we can take, but one of the things I want to look at is some of the background as to why I got here. Now, all of you have heard of Donald Trump, I imagine, if not A-Rod, and he comes across in his TV programs as being very opinionated, to put it very diplomatically. But he's actually, not a bad person. He's got a very kind heart and everything. And he came up with a series called The Wealth Builder's Blueprint, where he invited 7 people to speak on specific topics. Marketing, taxation, intellectual property, things like that. And he invited people to talk on all these things. And I would have thought that he would want to teach the real estate section himself, but I was honored by being asked to teach that bit. And there's the DVD we did. It's called Money While You Sleep. So I've worked with him, and I've created all kinds of products with him, bubble-proof real estate investing. And there I am on the faculty of Trump University, I think for 4.5 years. There I teach at Wealth Mastery, as Stuart said. Here's one, Jim Rohn. Does anyone know who Jim Rohn is? Jim Rohn was one of the most amazing guys there is. We were doing this event, 2006, I believe, in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. And after the event in Kuala Lumpur, he came down to me and said, Dolf, tell me, where are you living these days? And I said, well, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. And he said, no kidding, me too. What part of Phoenix are you in? And I said, well, I'm in the Biltmore. It's a part of town called the Biltmore. He said, I know it. No kidding, I live there too. He said, what street are you on? And I said, I'm not going to tell you whatever I say. You'll say, no kidding, me too, you know. I said, you tell me what street you're on. And he did, and I said, no kidding, me too. We were 3 doors apart and had to go to Kuala Lumpur to find it out. One of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. He's got a real heart of gold, and he is one of the most inspirational people. He died very unfortunately December the 5th, a couple of years ago. He was a big loss to the world. But I've had the honor and pleasure of working with a lot of these guys. I've been a professor of real estate at the University of North Texas. And then I was in the Rich Dad's Advisor series, as you probably know. This book has been translated into Bahasa. Many people don't know in which country they speak Bahasa. Bahasa is spoken in 2 countries, Malaysia and Indonesia. Indonesia, do you know it's the most populous nation in the southern hemisphere? Do you know there are more dollar millionaires in Indonesia than there are people in Australia? I mean, it's just phenomenal. And it's a canoe ride from Australia. In essence, right? I mean, it is. You can get there in a skiff or something. And there are opportunities there that are just... What's that?
Not me.
Not you? Okay. Well, anyway, there are huge... So we've got it in Bahasa. And then in Japanese. Now, I speak Japanese, so I've done a lot of work there. Here's an interesting one. 52 homes in 52 weeks. I once went to Vegas and bought a house. And I managed to do it without any of my own money, and it was cash flow positive. And I came back, and people said, what did you do this weekend? I said, oh, I'm all excited, and I tend to talk, so I share. I said, well, I went to Vegas, and I bought a house. And they said, well, that's all right for some, isn't it? I said, what do you mean? Well, if you can afford it, you can buy one. I said, no, it didn't cost me any money. And it's putting money in my pocket. And they said, well, you can't do that. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone says to you, hey, I just had lunch on the moon, I'd give you every right to say you can't do that with your arms folded. But if someone said they just rode a bicycle around Lake whatever, or they bought a house and it didn't cost them any money, what right do you have to say you can't do that? You might as well say, I think you're lying. So I got so sick of hearing it's impossible to do, I thought I'll show them. I'll buy one house a week for an entire year. And I did. And I wrote the book on it. I've got a CD course on it. I've run courses on it. And you know what people say now? You can't do that. So I've learned that there's no point convincing the naysayers. And I'm not here to convince you if you're a naysayer. If anything I say is impossible, what you're really saying is, well, I think you might have been able to do it, even though I seriously doubt it. But I know I couldn't do it. And because I can't do it, and I'm not the dumbest person on this planet, then I don't think the average person should, and you probably haven't done it anyway. And because I want to deny myself the right to do it, I'm going to think that you didn't do it either. That's why you can't do that. Instead of just flipping it around like those 3 dots on that sheet and saying, well, if you've done it, show me the numbers. I mean, I discuss every property. I've got photos of them, the people involved. It's all real, and you can check the titles anyway. Instead of that, why don't you say, you know, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. Maybe he'll teach me how. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm not a teacher, folks. I'm not an author, even though I've been blessed by having books on the New York Times bestseller list. By the way, that's the holy grail of book writing, right? Movie makers want to get an Oscar, and what else is there? There are all these awards that are specific to certain industries. And if you're a book writer, you want to be on the New York Times list. Well, I don't even think of myself as an author. Even today, I'm a property investor, and I'm happy to share how I do it. So, very interesting thing about Vegas that I just want to highlight, because it shows that if you change your mindset, you can change a lot. I'd go up to Vegas. Often I'd have a meeting cancel in the afternoon, so I'd fly from Phoenix to Vegas. It's a short flight. It's 37 minutes of airtime, so I'd be there in a jiffy. And I'd get my team to try and book a hotel room for me. Well, there are 135,000 hotel rooms on the Strip. All right. In fact, there's one intersection there, Las Vegas Boulevard and Tropicana, which has 4 hotels, the MGM with 5,005 rooms, and they're expanding it, New York, Excalibur, and the Tropicana. Those 4 hotels between them have more hotel rooms than the entire resort city of San Diego. So it's huge. 135,000 rooms on the Strip. Average occupancy about 1.62 people per room. So that means on any night there are about 200,000 people occupying hotels on the Strip. And more often than not, I couldn't get a room there, so they were full. So that means that there are 200,000 people doing what they do in Vegas. What's the primary reason they go? To gamble. All right, so you may not know this, but you know your chances of winning the jackpot? 1 in 16 million. All right. So here's a question for you, and I especially invite the accountants to think about this and the people who want to have a check on reality. If you do not win in the casinos, do the casinos give you your bets back? No, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Well, here's another slightly more sophisticated question. If you don't win, do they give you interest on the money that you gambled for the duration of the event? No, that's the most ridiculous thing. Do you know that the casinos are now sucking $1 billion through their casinos out of the economy every month? Every month, $1 billion US. And I love it. I love it because I call it voluntary taxation. That's why I can go to Vegas. I get subsidized hotel rooms, subsidized meals, subsidized everything, the best shows in the world. And most of it's paid for by the people who throw money at these machines, all right? So hold that thought. 1 chance in 60 million of winning, no money back, no interest on your money. Once a month in Vegas, there's an event called a tax lien certificate sale. You don't need to remember this. I'm not encouraging you to do it, or that's not a bad idea. And what it means is if someone's behind in their rates, what do they do here in Sydney? If you're behind in your rates, what happens? How long does it take for the sheriff to come? Does he come the very week you're late? No, it can take 2 years, right? So the council's got millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars of outstanding rates that haven't been paid. Well, in the United States, when you're behind in your rates, they call it property taxes here, which is probably a slightly more accurate description. Then they have a sale called a tax lien certificate sale, and it's a lien because they have this room and only about 50 people turn up, and they say, right, here's a property, they owe $3,500 on their taxes. Who wants to pay their taxes on their behalf? If you choose to pay the taxes and you pay the $3,500, you get a lien, which is like a debt to you, which is secured on the title, and by law it ranks higher than the first mortgage. So it's got the best security. And when you've paid that, that lien is on the title, it's in your name, and the owner of the property has what's called a redemption period of 18 months to pay you back, plus 16% interest. So they've got 18 months to pay you back plus 16% interest. If they don't pay you back in that time frame, you get the house. Is that a hot deal? So let's just review it. Someone's behind in their property taxes. You elect to pay them for them. You pay the property taxes, and you are guaranteed to get your capital back plus 16%, or you get the house. About 50 people turn up on a Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month for that. And yet every night, 200,000 people turn up for 1 chance in 16 million of winning. And if you don't win, no money back and no interest. I don't understand that. Now, the good thing for you, and I want to acknowledge it, you are here tonight. It's a midweek night. You could have been home watching inane soaps on TV. You could have been spending time with your kids, which is a very admirable thing to do. You could be taking your special one out for a dinner or something. You could just be relaxing. And you chose to give up all of that to be here. So I want to acknowledge that, and I thank you for being here. I just hope that at the end of the evening you'll say, well, that was a fair exchange. It was worthwhile. But do you see how I can't understand how some people think? And the trick in life is not to figure out how the masses think. Don't figure out how the 200,000 think. If anything, go to the tax lien sales yourself, or do whatever you want to do yourself. And talk to your friends and people, and this is why I get up on stage. This is why I'm back in Australia, because I feel I can contribute. Some people donate to various societies, and I think the best I can do, even though I could contribute to the leprosy campaign in Africa or the local cat society or something, I think I can have a bigger impact for more people by teaching them what I do, or at least sharing what I do and giving them the option. Does that all make sense? So anyway, that's what we do in Vegas, and the great commercial deals there. Whole bunch of books I've written, 15 of them now. But this is kind of my favorite book because this is on commercial real estate. And I want to spend a bit of time discussing this with you tonight and some of the aspects of it, because most people don't understand what makes commercial so special. Just to finish it off, I've got lots of other courses here. Some I have that I can show here. We'll talk about them a little bit later. And then we also have software, because even though I try to simplify things and, to give that some perspective, for those of you who don't know, I spent 8 years at university. I ended up getting a PhD in electrical engineering. Some of you will know that's not the easiest course around. That's 7 days a week, 11 hours a day. All right, and it's because I came from a family that believed that to do well in life, you have to study hard and get a degree. And yet when I first came to university, I looked around at the people with the degrees, the professors and the tutors and the lecturers, and they didn't seem rich to me. They were well off, but they weren't rich. And even if they're on a salary of $110,000 a year, which is for many people a handsome salary, you'll know on the 1st of January that all you earn by the 31st of December is that 10,000, maybe with a 2% inflation index salary increase. But you won't earn 11 million or 50 million. There's no way you'll earn that. And that's why when I was a professor at UNT, one of the criteria that I instituted there is that if a teacher of real estate can't earn at least 5 times his academic salary doing the deals that he's teaching about, then he shouldn't be a teacher. And I think 5 is modest, but I wanted a bar put in place. It should have been, 50 times or something. Does that make sense? So anyway, I realized that there was more to life than engineering, but the engineering came in handy because we've developed the software, and this is the software I always wanted. I tried every program out there. But when you analyze real estate, most software tries to analyze it from the perspective of, is it a good deal or is it a bad deal? And you can't do that, folks. The question has to be, is it a good deal for your circumstances? Everyone has a different amount of cash in the bank, a different borrowing capacity, a different ability to raise capital, different energy and zest that you can put into it, different experience level, and therefore a deal that may not be good for me could well be very good for one of you. And the trick is, how do you discern that? So we developed this over the years and we added to it, and it's quite sophisticated. When you come to one of my programs, we include it and we spend quite a bit of time analyzing it. And just to show you the way we do things, the CD is silkscreen printed, but even the instruction book, it's in full color, because have you ever had it when you look at what the screenshot should be and it's all black and white? Well, here it's full color. Anyway, that's by the by. So we've got all the tools to use this stuff, and again, programs in Japanese and whatnot. And here, I just want to give you a perspective. We went through a very bad phase worldwide, everywhere. Everything was in turmoil, and we're slowly coming through it. But there were lots of foreclosures, which are probably called mortgagee sales here. But look at this. Every house on the street was for sale. And before we launch into some of the commercial specific stuff, I want to share a little video clip. It was a low resolution and quality recording from a newsreel to just highlight how bad it got in the States.
Demolishing these homes. I've got the story from the guys on this site, as well as Patrick Thatcher, who is the reporter who reported on this. And it was Matthews Homes who owned the homes. It was Guarantee Bank in Irvine who is paying for the destruction of these homes. And this is just amazing footage we've got right now. The story is there were 4 model homes and 12 almost finished homes. The bank was being fined daily by the city of Victorville for these unfinished homes. And they decided just to destroy the homes. And here's the breaking news I've got for you right now. The guy who's running this machine here told me that they've got another 20 homes in Temecula, California. That's about an hour from here. The location of this site is Victorville, California, on Bear Valley Road and the 395. I don't have an exact address, of course, because this is new homes without an address. But there's the story for you. I'll print the story and post it on my website on visionvictorymanifesto.com. But definitely breaking news right now. I mean, they're literally destroying these homes. in Southern California, and this is not the end of it. They're going to hit another set of homes in California. They've already destroyed one of them. This is the second house of the day.
So folks, do you get what went on here? The builder, the developer built these homes, and because they weren't quite finished, because the market slowed down, he didn't make the pre-sales that he thought he would make, the council started fining him on a daily basis because they just want money. And then he thought, it's going to be cheaper for me to destroy them. Is this good or bad? Well, folks, I want you to remember one thing. Whenever I ask a question, the correct answer is neither good nor bad. It's always, it depends. It depends entirely on whether you're the developer or the guy getting the contract to demolish them, because he made some money out of it. Or whether you might be a little bit opportunistic and say, well, dang it all, surely we can find tenants for these things, and if they're only 95% complete, we'll do the painting ourselves or employ a bunch of people to do it. Do you think there's an opportunity here? So anything that's good or bad, depending on your perspective, can be turned around, or you've got to look at it with a new light. You've got to see it from a different angle. So that's how bad the situation was in the States. Prices were so low there. They say it's the worst crisis since the Great Depression, that none of us will ever see it again in our lifetimes. Prices went down in Phoenix up to 80%. Is that good or bad? It depends. It's hot. Prices were low. So at one stage we brought Australians across because the Australian dollar was the highest it had been in 58 years, right? It peaked at about $1.10 or $1.11. The US dollar was low and the market there was low. We had Australians not being able to believe it. They say, what we spend for one house in Australia, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house or whatever, we can buy not 4 but 5 of them over in the States. And they each generate as much rent. So why weren't you there? Well, busy, life, kids, schooling, this, that, the other thing. Have a job, couldn't take the time off and all that. That's why I applaud you for being here, because even if you don't take action today, you might decide to take action in a year's time because of attending tonight. And that will be better than not attending and having watched a soap, because I can guarantee you whatever you would have watched on TV tonight, any ridiculous soap, which is only a scriptwriter's fantasy, it's not a reflection of reality, and they just fantasize scripts to entice you to watch sufficiently so that when there's an ad break on, you watch the ads, because that's how they make money. When you watch that program, it's that in a year's time you'll have zero benefit from having watched that program. But by attending events like this, and not just this one, anyone, you know, Stuart puts on a whole series of great events. And by the way, is it a competition between all the speakers that, oh, I promote commercial and someone promotes development and someone promotes renovating? Oh, don't do that. No. They are all possible. You can intertwine them all. I focus on commercial. Have I developed commercial? Yes. Do I renovate commercial? You better believe it. That's where some of the greatest profits can be made. So the point is you never learn less. And I'll often get it. You know, it's very interesting. When I had only one book, people would buy it. But when I had 2 books, they'd say to me, they'd come up to me at the end of an event and say, well, which one should I buy? And I'd say, well, let me ask you, how much money do you hope to make in real estate? Like $50, $100? And they said, no, like $500,000, $1 million. You can't even spend $20 buying these books. Why would you choose one or the? Just get them all. So it's a little bit like that. So it's all very interesting. So I'm here to show you that you can intertwine any of these, but my personal preference is commercial. Let's go over some of the reasons why. The fundamental difference between commercial and residential, and I imagine there are people who's already invested in commercial. I'm great, happy to see that. And how many of you are involved in the commercial real estate industry? You might be an appraiser or a valuer, I guess it's called, and an inspector or a leasing agent or something. A few of you, that you have to be willing to admit it. Well, I guess you wouldn't have put your hand up there another way. Okay, here and there, I see these hands go. So there is a fundamental difference that most people in commercial understand between commercial real estate and residential real estate. And it's more philosophical than factual, but it's very important. And that is, whichever way you cut, slice, or dice it, when you deal with residential investment property, you deal with people. Now, I know there's a document called the Residential Tenancy Act, and they have to sign it. But in essence, you're dealing with people and the vagaries of their thinking. So you'll have a tenant call you and say, well, the toilet's blocked. And you say, well, what on earth are you putting in there? This is the third time in the last month that it's blocked. And they said, none of your stinking business, but get it fixed. I said, right, I'll call the plumber. So you call the plumber. Well, I can do 2 p.m. on Friday. So you call the tenant. He says, no, mate, I'm busy then. Make it Monday. Well, why didn't you tell me that before? But anyway, what have you got on Monday? Well, I've got these. Does that work? No, but Tuesday would work. And you're dealing with people, all right? The council sends a notice to the landlord to say the grass out front is too high, and you as owner of the property have to get it cut. And you call the tenant and say, I got a letter from council. They say it has to be cut. Well, I cut it last week. Doesn't matter. I still got the letter, and they still say it's too long. And if we don't cut it, then, did you say we cut it? Well, then you cut it. I said, no, according to the tenancy agreement, you hear what I'm saying. You're dealing with people. Whereas with commercial real estate, in essence, even though people are involved, the tenant, in essence, you deal with contracts. All right, so whatever's stipulated in the contract, that's what happens. How does this manifest itself? All over the world, if you're behind in your rental payment on your home, how quickly can you take action? Can you evict them a day later? No. In some jurisdictions, the laws are very strict. In California, for instance, you have to wait 90 days from the day that they're first late before you can take any serious action. I'm happy to announce that in Vegas, it's only 5 days, and you can turn up with the sheriff and literally evict him. But in general, governments all over the world give tenants a lot of leeway, because let's face it, it's not their fault that they're behind in rent, it's society's fault, because society's rapacious. In fact, you racketeering, rapacious, fat-bellied landlords are probably part of the problem, because you're sucking so much money out of the economy that you're making these tenants poor. So we're going to enact legislation to protect those poor, kind, innocent tenants, while you mean-spirited, rich, fat pigs can suffer. You know, that's sort of the attitude. And does that work in general? Yes, because when they go for elections, remember, the primary aim of any candidate is to be re-elected. It's not necessarily to do good. And if you were to go up on a platform for re-election, would you get more votes if you protected tenants or if you protected landlords? Tenants, because there are just more of them. So it's there's a saying that any politician can get elected so long as the number of people to whom he's promising 3 free ice creams every day is larger than the number of people he has to tax to pay for them. You follow me? So, commercial is contracts. Everything's spelled out. So when a tenant is behind in their commercial lease, it's already stated in the lease that if it's more than 1 day behind, or 5 days, or 10 days, it just depends. Usually you do what's normal in that jurisdiction, then penalty shall accrue at the rate of 1% per month on an annual basis, and there might also be a lump sum penalty. And if they still don't pay, you can distrain for rent. Does anyone know what it means to distrain for rent? You can seize the premises. You can change the locks. Now, can you seize the staff? Anyone? No, of course not. That would be kidnapping or whatever it's called, or withholding against their will. But you can change the locks. You can seize their plant, equipment, inventory, everything. And then you can sell it off. Under very strict conditions, you have to run a minimum number of ads of a minimum size and a minimum number of publications, a minimum time before the auction, and you have to hold it for auction so that you get a fair market price. But then when you collect the thousands of dollars from selling their stuff, you can apply that to the back rent and the penalty rent and the penalty interest. And if there's any money left over, guess what? No, you have to give it to them. But even so, you can do that. Can you do that with residential tenants who are late? Can you seize your home and seize their clothes and their teeth? No, of course not. And tenants know that. So if you have a person who is a tenant in both a commercial premise and a home, and he can only pay one of the two, but he can't pay both, guess which one he's not going to pay? The house. All right, so you've just got much better security of rent. You've got contracts, and I love those contracts. So now let's explore some of the advantages, the pros of commercial real estate. Can anyone think of some of the advantages you've got with commercial? Yes, sir.
Tenant pays.
The tenant pays rent? Oh, okay. So this is a very important one. We'll call it the outgoings. with most residential property, your tenant pays their rent, sometimes on a weekly basis, in many parts of the world on a monthly basis, but the landlord has to pay the rates, the insurance, the maintenance. Most commercial lease documents are stipulated that the tenant shall pay their portion, if it's many tenants, their portion of the rates and insurance and the maintenance. And you even stipulate how that ratio, if there are multiple tenants, is derived. It's based on square meters of what they occupy versus the other tenants, or they have the prime spot, the ground floor or something. They're up for 16.8% of all the outgoings. So that's a very good one. Do you see the power of that? So, and that's called a triple net lease for those of you who are familiar with it, right? It's triple net. It's net of rates, insurance, and maintenance. That makes a huge difference to your returns. Also, if the council increases the rates or if the insurance company ups the premium, you just pass it on to the lessee. In fact, we usually have all our payments, all of them without exception, made by automatic bank transfer. And instead of having one for the rent and the outgoings, we always split it into two. And this is just a minor point, but file it away in the back of your mind somewhere. We have the rent, and then in the bank statement, we have next rent review and the date for it so that it triggers us in a memory. And then we have the outgoings. Why would we separate them? Because the leases, they have specific times for rent reviews. And even if the council increases the rates and you pass that on to the tenant, only one of their two APs change. They can see that the rent has stayed the same for the entire duration of that rent review period. All right, they don't think that you're hoodwinking them or whatever. So it's just a minor point. So outgoing, very important one, very significant. Someone else. All right, same person. What's another advantage? Longer lease. Who said that? Do you think that's an advantage? Yes, longer lease. It's hugely important. So I'm going to call that lease length. I'm going to abbreviate it. Lease length, yes. With residential, sometimes you struggle to get a one-year lease, and certainly 2 or 3, that's tough. And usually when that expires or rolls over, it goes to monthly basis or weekly basis, correct? But with commercial, not only is it normal to have longer lease lengths, but the tenants want it. The most frequent question we get from our portfolio around the world is, could I get an extension on the lease, please? And we look it up and we say, but you have still 5 years to run. And they say, yes, could we get an extension on the lease, please? Why would they want an extension when they've still got 5 years to run? To protect their business. There's an aspect to real estate, commercial real estate, that if you're new to it, it's kind of new, and if you know it, it's old hat. But it's called goodwill, and it's an intangible. And they have goodwill from the reputation they've got and the customer service they give. That's why Zedell Properties has tremendous goodwill in terms of the quality of the service they offer. Would you agree with that? Certainly my impression. But it's also location, because of the, you've got thousands of clients and they always drive to the same spot. Then, of course, they want to use the same premise. So they want a longer lease. Even if they are going to sell within 3 months, they ask for an extension of the lease. Why do you think that might be? They're not going to be there anymore. What do they care? Because it affects the sale price. If you say, yes, I've got this multi-million-dollar business and it's been going for 20 years and I want to sell it now for 10 million. And they say, well, how long to run on the lease? And you say, well, actually, it expires next week. That's not as good as we've got a 5-year period locked in with a right of renewal for another 3 periods of 5 years. That's exciting, isn't it? So it's a very important one that we overlook. So you've got a longer lease length. What else? Over here, sorry? The maintenance, yes. The lease clause always says that the tenants shall maintain the property in the same condition that it was when they took over the premises. So, when a tap leaks in a home or the toilet gets blocked, they call you and say, stupid house, the toilet's blocked again, as if it's your fault, right? But when that happens on a commercial property, they don't call you. Firstly, they know that in the lease it's their responsibility to fix it. And secondly, they know that if you call it, you're out playing golf. I just use that as an example. I don't actually play golf because my name prevents it. People would have to call and say, do you want a game of golf, Dolf? It doesn't happen. No, I'm serious. That's why I haven't yet met a man called Dennis who plays tennis, and I'm sure it's for the same reason. But if you were playing golf, they'd call you and say, hey, my tap's leaking. And you'd say, yes, and I've got 84 yards to my destination, whatever that's called, the hole that you throw the ball into, batted into. You can tell I'm not a sports person, but I didn't know A-Rod either. It takes too long then. You have to call the plumber and call them. No, they call it, they get it fixed, they want their business up and running. So yes, they look after things. I'm just going to call it maintenance, but not only that. How many of you have had residential tenants who have added an extra bedroom to your home? Or, I can't even say with a straight face, or have put a new kitchen in or something. It doesn't happen, does it? It's never happened. The best remodeling I've had, and I wouldn't call it the best, but the most I've had in terms of remodeling is where they tried to make it bigger by punching holes in the wall. And then they had the audacity to call me to fix it because it's drafty. You know, whereas commercial tenants earn their income on the premises. They have a vested interest in having it look good. So they want you to do things to it, and they want to do things themselves. So they will paint it. I have some shops, they paint their premises every 2 years because they want it fresh and crisp and clean and no faded colors or anything. Is that good? All right, so very interesting difference. It gets better than that. Most commercial leases have a clause that if the lessee requests the lessor to make improvements and the lessor chooses to agree, then extra rental shall be paid to the landlord at the rate of X% of the cost of the improvement. All right, so I'll give you an example. I had a tenant call me and they said, listen, I know that the lease says that if I want to make changes, I have to get your permission first. I said, yes, that's right. And he said, well, I want to tear down the entire front wall of the building. And I said, so far, permission not granted. And he said, but I want to replace it with a glass wall because that'll allow more light in and people driving by can see it, and I think it would be great. I said, perfect. And he said, well, it's going to cost about $100,000. I said, great. You have my permission. And that's when he said, well, one more minor thing. I'd like you to pay for it. Now, what would you say? No, right? No. Why would you pay for that? Well, this was in the days when going interest rates were 10%. Is that high or low? It depends on the market. Do you remember a time when interest rates were 16%? Who's got enough gray hair to remember 16%? Yes, and more, right? A lot more. So 10% is pretty hot. In fact, if you need interest rates to be below 10% to make your deal work, I'd say look for other deals, you know. It's just what they were. So my clause in the lease said that if the landlord makes improvements, extra rental should be paid at the rate of 12%. So think about this. They wanted me to pay the $100,000, but they were willing to pay an extra $12,000 a year in rent. Now is it looking good? Yeah, it's looking a lot better, right? Still depends, but it's looking good. I get a 12% return. Now you might ask, why wouldn't the landlord pay for it and he would save $12,000? He'd get the 12% return. Well, he didn't have the capital. All right? Forget whether I have the capital. It's not about how much capital you've got. The most expensive piece of real estate is the 6 inches, give or take an inch or two, between your right ear and your left ear, because it's what you can create in your noggin that will determine your net worth ultimately. All right? So he wanted me to spend $100,000. I'd get $12,000 a year in extra rent. That's a 12% return. Is that good or great? It's pretty good. All right. Well, let me try and spice it up a bit, because whenever you change something to a building, the tax office in your jurisdiction, here's the ATO, allows you to apportion some to repairs and maintenance and some to improvements, capital improvements. So in the case of this building, about 20% represented repairs. The old wall was crumbling down anyway. So we could claim 20% against income. That means you get a tax write-off, and here your rates are what, 60%, or have they dropped them a bit? So call it 33%. So a third of that you'd get back, right? So it didn't cost 100, it only cost 94,000. You follow me? A third of the 20 you get back in the same year, about 6. So it only costs you 94. Now that remaining 80,000, even though you can't write that off against your income, you can depreciate it. If you don't know what depreciation is, it doesn't matter. You tell your accountant to work out the numbers. But for those of you who know, you have a choice between straight line or usually a slightly higher rate at diminishing value, depending again on your jurisdiction. It varies state by state and country by country. We could depreciate that at 4%. That's pretty hot. So we were down to only a 90,000 expenditure. And my return wasn't 12% of 90. It was 12,000 on 90. It had gone up already. So it was even better. Is that sounding more enticing? All right, so that's great. So I only spend 90,000, but I get 12,000 a year. Some of you aren't excited enough about that yet, so I'm going to spice it up a bit more. You have a choice of paying 100,000 cash and getting 10 back, basically, outlay of 90 and getting 12,000 a year. But what I did is I got a valuer in. Because when you spend money to make an improvement, let's say we spend $10,000 on a house, how much does the value of the house go up by? It's 10,000, right? Well, if you're nodding your head, you're too taken by my powers of persuasion. No, it's more, a lot more. If you use that 10,000 to build an extra bedroom, I guess you'd have to do some of the work yourself because that's pretty cheap. But it might go up by 100,000. Are you with me? So I got an appraiser and said, listen, this dingy, horrible, stinky old building has now got a beautiful glass curtain, and anyone on the street can't see that the rest of it is still dingy and old. They think it's all nice and modern. What's it worth now? Well, to keep the story short, he appraised it at about 200,000 more than before. So 100,000 was spent, but the value went up by 200,000. So I went to the bank and I said, Mr. Bank Manager, I have here a new appraisal for the building. There's been a $200,000 increase in value since I last had the appraisal done. Would you give me a modest 50% loan? And he said, oh, that's not high. Yes, you don't need more? No, I'm fine. So he gave me 50, what's 50% of 100,000? Of 200? 100,000. But I had to pay interest. What were interest rates at the time? 10%. So I'm paying 10% of 100,000. It's costing me 10,000, but I'm still collecting 12. So we have a choice, folks. You can spend 100,000, get 10,000 back from the government that year, and get 12,000 a year for the rest of your life. Or you can spend no money, you get the mortgage, you only get 2,000 a year, but it's on money you didn't invest. So I opted to do that. And here's the net result. My income, my net income, went up by $2,000 a year. My debt went up by 100,000, but my equity went up by 200,000. My equity went up, my collateral went up, my income went up, my taxes went up. Is paying a lot of tax good or bad? It's hot, folks. I wish my tax bill were 3 million smackaroos a week. And you should too. So when you write out that check for the ATO every year, don't say, oh, gosh, they're ripping me off. Pay it with pleasure. And include a note. Next year, I hope it's a lot more. So all those things went up, but I haven't even hit the most important thing that went up. The thing that went up the most was my tenant appreciation. Can you see how word would spread? Oh my gosh, I just asked my landlord, I thought he was going to say no, whether he would put a $100,000 glass curtain on my building, and he did. And he seemed to be happy about it. Is he an idiot? All of that is in maintenance, and who pays for things to be done up? That's cool, isn't it? Can you think of any others? I didn't, were there fire? Higher returns. Yes, the returns can be higher. Yeah, that's a very good one. Index, meaning? Oh, the rental. Oh, yes. There's another way of putting that, is that in commercial, it's normal. Well, let me put it this way. When you have a residential property and the economy improves, are you allowed to increase the rent? Yes. But if the economy goes down, are you kind of forced to reduce the rent? You're not forced to, but if you don't and everyone else is reduced, they'll all leave, right, and go elsewhere. With commercial, they're on a lease. So just about every commercial lease that has any quality will have, it's one word, I hasten to add that because it sounds like two words, but it's got a ratchet clause. That's why it's one word, ratchet, not ratchet, but anyway. It's the ratchet clause. It's also known as the upwards only rent review clause. And what that means is the rents can go up, but they never go down. Now, on the face of it, you might think, well, that's a bit unfair. I told you these commercial landlords were racketeering so-and-sos. But there's actually a very sane and sensible reason for it, and that is that commercial landlords, en masse and individually, can offer rents at a substantially lower rate if they know that there is a ratchet clause in it, so that you can structure things and get your financing so that you're always covered. It's not as if next month the economy will go down and then suddenly rents go down. So yeah, you've got... what are we going to call it here? I'll call it ratchet, but R-A-T-C-H-E. I think it's double T in Australia. There we go. So a ratchet clause. Very important point. Can anyone else think of anything? Because there are a ton more. Even I'm... yes, sir.
Make good the property. They have to put it back the way the property was.
Yes. Who hasn't had a residential tenant, if you haven't, you're blessed and lucky, but who hasn't had one, where you walk in at the end and it's been so destroyed, it's almost soul destroying. We've all had that, right? They've stolen things, taken bathtubs out or whatever. You know, just horrid, horrid stuff. You don't get that with commercial. You do an inspection, and it was already in the lease that they shall restore it to exactly the way it was, unless it's by written agreement, when they moved in. And it covers you in all those situations. Well, in this book, we've got a ton more, but we don't really have time to go over them because there are so many advantages here that it's kind of crazy. But I want to highlight a couple of things, because all of you are saying, all right, we suspect there may well be a few advantages, but we're hung up on the fact that there are two major disadvantages. Would you agree with that there could be disadvantages? Do any come to mind? Vacancies, all right. So I'm now going to talk about, I think, is the blue one a bit fatter and easier to read? So I'm now going to put cons, so disadvantages of commercial. Now, I can only think of two. One is you have vacancies, meaning if you have a vacant residential property, what's the problem? Is it that the color of the carpet in the spare bedroom is the wrong shade of blue? No. Is it that the aspect of the kitchen window relative to where the sun rises in winter is off? No. What's the problem? The rent's too high. Drop the rent. Do you do weekly here in New South Wales? All right. So drop it by 50 or 100 a week or 200 depending on the price point, and you'll get a tenant. There's always someone willing to rent a place at market rentals. Would you agree with that in general? Sometimes demand exceeds supply and the rents creep up, and sometimes supply exceeds demand and the rents creep down. But you can always get a tenant by adjusting the rent. With commercial, you might have a brilliant commercial, and even if you halve the rent, you can't get it. Because the property is ideally suited to making telex machines. All right, a lot of you are not even old enough to know what they were. A lot of these properties are ideally suited to making fax machines. All right, some of you don't even know what they are, okay. A lot of you thought it was ideal for operating your MySpace account out of, and that's gone, right? So even by dropping the rent, you've got a vacancy. Is that a big problem? Major problem. What's the other problem? Bigger deposit? Do you agree with that? Yep, bigger deposit, lender ratio. I would put it as they've got a lower, do you call it LTV or LTR? Loan to value or loan, LVR, loan to value ratio or loan to value ratio, whatever. So it's lower. So whereas they might lend you 70 or 80% on residential, what's the current rate here in Australia? 80%? Has it ever been higher? Yes, I'm going to ask the Grey Brigade again. It was 90, it was 100. The highest I've heard of in Australia is 110. That's not even the highest in the world. I was living in the Netherlands in the 1970s, 125%. And they were unrepentant about it. They said, well, sir or madam, we know you're buying a house for, say, 100 or a million, call it, but we want to give you $1.25 million because you can't just move into that house and expect to like it. You're going to want to redecorate it and remodel it, add this and add that. And we're happy to give you the extra money because you'll spend the money on the house and that will give us extra collateral as security. I mean, they were awash with money and just tried to get it out. When they're awash with money, the loan-to-value ratio on residential goes up. That's why we had no docs loans in the States and stated income loans. A stated income loan is where you apply for a loan and you state the income that you need to state in order to qualify for the loan. No, I'm serious. It was known that it had no correlation with your actual income. That's why it's not called actual income loan. It was called a stated income loan. That's what I stated. So you wanted to buy a $4 million property. You couldn't afford it. You couldn't afford a $400,000 property. But it didn't matter. You just stated, well, I earn $2 million a year, and they'd give you the loan, and it wouldn't matter because a year later it would have gone to $5 million. The bank was covered, you were covered, and it all worked wonderfully well until, and it was inevitable, the writing was so on the wall. You know, you'd have to be proverbially blind not to see it. So I don't know if you can think of any others. These are the only two disadvantages I can think of with commercial. It can be difficult to get a tenant, and the banks are only willing to lend a lot less. Typically it's around 60%. Depending on circumstances and jurisdiction, they might go up a bit. Sometimes it's a bit lower. Yes, ma'am.
The losses can be higher if you've got a business that goes out.
All right. The comment is that losses can be higher if you have a business that goes out of business. I mean, I'm happy to add that because I think some of you know where I'm headed with this. If I can debunk these two or even these three, if you get a loss, if I can destroy the concept that there are disadvantages, have we solved the disadvantages? And now we're only dealing with the advantages. All right? So which one do you want to do first? Let's talk about vacancies. Are you with me so far? Am I speaking too fast? No, good. You know, in the States, they always say, where's your accent from? And I say, you guys don't get it. I don't have an accent. When you're down under, everyone speaks this way. You know, you have the accent. It's called American. They don't like that, you know. Okay, so vacancy rate. Not only should you not be fearful of losing a tenant, I love properties that don't have a tenant. Is that rattling your cage a little bit? They're far superior. Because when you have a property with a tenant, let's say it's generating $100,000 a year in rent, they're going to ask roughly $1 million, right? Cap rate of 10%. Well, how can I make money out of that? Am I supposed to make money from the 10% I earn and wait for capital growth to kick in? All right, to discover this one, I'm going to take you on a tangent. They'll be the only two formulae I give you. Tonight, or even I run this weekend event, and even there, it's not computationally heavy because I always believe with anything in life, if you can't strip it down to its essential elements and make it simple, then it's not worth doing. Oh, and that's what I said. See, I don't have a script, in case you haven't noticed, and there are multiple reasons why I don't have a script. If I had a script and I lost it, what on earth would I talk about, right? And secondly, have you ever been to an event where they say, well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy to be back in Perth. Sydney, sorry. I'm so happy to be in... So boring, isn't it? So I'm speaking from the heart, and I remembered what I was going to say and went on this tangent, and I've now forgotten what I was going to say. So it'll probably come to me, but there are only two things I'm going to share, two formulae. But they're kind of pretty important formulae. And one of them is we're going to compare residential with commercial when it comes to how we value a property. So when we're talking about residential property, would you not agree that the typical equation that your accountant and your financial planner will give you is that the return you get, sometimes called the ROI, return on investment, equals the rent divided by something? What do you think it will be? The what, sorry? The outgoings? Oh, that's a good guess. All right. The what? Oh, the loan? No, the return on your property. If it's a 10% returning property, what does that mean? It's the rental income divided by what? Your purchase price, yes. All right. Now, purchase price. Folks, if some of you knew that and were hoping I'd go on meteor stuff, another of you are still wondering what the woman thing was about, but anyway. If this isn't second nature to you, I'd encourage you to read books. And it's not a pitch for my books. Unlike some people who say, well, I wouldn't read Dolf's books because of this. I had one critic say that you shouldn't read my books because in my books, and you won't even get this, but in my books, It said that sometimes you have to repaint the roof of a house. Now, do you ever paint roofs here in Australia? Yeah, of course you do. So that's why you don't get it. But in the States, it's very uncommon to see a roof of any kind that needs painting. They use tiles or it's non-paintable stuff. So he said, I obviously don't understand real estate, painting the roof. So unlike people who criticize others, I say there is no such thing as a bad book on real estate. My theory is if you spend 20, 30, 15, whatever dollars on a book and kill 3 hours of your life consuming it, and even if you only get one idea from that, that idea could be worth a fortune to you. So read it. Read a book a week. Read one a day if you can, but read at least one a month. You'll never learn less. So when you read, you never learn less. Reading anything is a good idea. We always say readers are leaders, and the way I like to put it is, he who does not read has no advantage over he who cannot read. Right? So turn that telly off and read some books. So if this wasn't second nature, the return of any investment, you invest in something, in an ostrich farm, what are the returns? It's the income you generate from it by selling ostrich, can't think of the thought right now, but ostrich meat and eggs and all that sort of thing, and you divide it by the cost of acquiring the ostrich farm. That's the return. So return on residential property is rent divided by the purchase price. If that's not second nature, you've got to read some more, go to courses, all the courses. Go to all of Stuart's programs. He puts on an incredible range. I sat through the entire series. It's mind-boggling. It's great. So this is standard in residential, but here's an interesting thing about residential, which is another advantage of commercial. Who determines the rent? Can the landlord decide what the rent will be in his or her sole discretion? No. I mean, you can show, I want $10,000 a week for that, but you're not going to get it. In essence, it's the market. Would you agree? So the market determines this factor here. And who determines the purchase price of a property? The market. There are exceptions, folks, and part of the trick when you do residential is to find those exceptions. How can you buy distressed properties from banks or something? But the market determines the return, in essence. Right? So hold that thought. We might have to come back to it, because now I want to talk about commercial. And here we've got how commercial is evaluated. With commercial, it's in essence the same, but it's got a different emphasis, and you'll see it's got a huge, huge implication. In commercial property, we say the value of a commercial property equals the rental income divided by, now I don't expect many of you to know this, and even some of you who are in commercial may not fully appreciate or understand this. So you're with me so far? We're going to work out the value of a commercial property equals the rent divided by, and I'll write it down for you, it's cap rate. Now, for those of you who don't know, cap rate is an abbreviation for capitalization rate. It literally means the rate at which you capitalize the rental income to arrive at the value of a property. Most people in commercial estate, and with all due respect to those professionals that I'm very grateful for that are in commercial real estate, they get it wrong. They will say things like, well, this property is selling at a cap rate of 5%. And I know what they mean. They say the return is 5%. But the first question I ask, and you can hold this thought, but I explain this more on the weekend event. The first question I ask when I hear that a property is available at 5% is, what are market cap rates in that area for that class of building? Because if I asked you, is 5% a good return or a bad return? What would you say? It depends. You're right. Now, I get the feeling you're saying that by rote. But what does it depend on? It depends on two things. The market, like what the market's doing, are cap rates rising or falling, and also the geographic location. Because some of you might think, well, I wouldn't buy a property no matter how funny Dolf is at 5%. That's bad. Well, let me tell you, in New York on Wall Street, which arguably is the most desirable strip of real estate in the world, market cap rates are 2%. What does that mean? If you've got rental income of $1 million, then investors are willing to pay $50 million to acquire that rental stream because it's pretty well guaranteed forever because it's on Wall Street. Are you with me? 1 million divided by 50 million is 2%, obviously, right? So, but can you see what I've just said? If you've got cap rates of 2% on Wall Street, then a rental income of $1 million will mean the value is $50 million, because investors are willing to spend $50 million to acquire that investment. That's different from residential. In residential, we'd say, well, no, the rental is $1 million and the asking price is 50, so the returns are 2%. It's sort of the same, but can you see how in one case we work out the return and it's determined by the market? And in the other case, we say no, the value of a building is the rental income divided by the cap rate. Is the cap rate determined by the market? Yeah, I said on Wall Street it's 2%. In Podunk, in gunpowder, I've been there. I did an event in gunpowder. It's the only city where I've had 100% attendance. And I was really honored until I realized they didn't even have a movie theater, so I was just entertainment, you know. So yes, the cap rate is determined by the market. What determines the rent? Let me tell you, it's your creativity. The more creative you are, and I'll give you some examples of that, the more creative you are, because the cap rate stays the same, the higher the value of your property. So I want you to think about that. You've got that building on Wall Street. It's got rental income of $1 million, cap rate of 2%, it's worth 50. If you can figure out a way of ethically and morally and by having willing lessees pay you $2 million, what happens to the value of that building? It doubles to $100 million. If you go back to a house and you've got someone paying rent of $400 a week and it's worth $200,000, say, even if you could induce someone to pay double that, $800, which you wouldn't because it's determined by the market, but even if you could, would you be able to sell the house for more? No. Do you hear what I've said? This is significant. This is the biggest aha you can have in commercial real estate. With residential, you have little control over the value of it. You wait for the market to improve. With commercial, the value is determined by the rent. And if you can change the rent, you can change the value. Cap rates change over time. They sometimes go down. They sometimes go up. You can play that game too. If you buy where cap rates are falling, then values go up. If you buy where cap rates are rising, values go down. So if you time that right, you can get that too. But this is the biggest thing.